Have you got kids? You know anyone who does. They're a lot of work, right? Many people would tell you, including me, it's a full-time job. Either you look after them, or you pay someone else to. It's around the clock. Now if you live in Australia, you have kids and you don't have an income, or you're on minimum wage, give or take a few $100s a week, you're entitled to some money from Centrelink-itis called the parenting payment, and if you get it, you might have to sail up to something called Parents Next. Maybe you've heard of it? So it was a real waiting game and I was just very confused. I did think that I would have a right to the written reasons within the appeal period. It's already difficult enough for asylum seekers and refugees, but when you don't actually know why you've been rejected and people keep telling you that, well, there were oral reasons given on the day, this particular person speaks barely passable English. So there's absolutely no way that he was able to instruct me in any professional sense at all. Meanwhile, Joe's 21 CJ deadline came and went and still no written judgment. Introduction to the History of Psychology begins with a course, Why Study the History of Psychology? And I'd like to discuss several factors that are important to this. Because of course, as a formal discipline, psychology came about in about 1879. And we tend to say with the founding of Wilhelm Wundt's laboratory in Leipzig. However, we need to also understand that the concerns of psychology are around well before this date, and therefore it helps to look at what historians have to say about how we go back in time and look at our past, so then when one begins to say why study the history of psychology, you can really hone in on 4 principles. And the interesting thing, of course, you run into a semiotics issue very quickly. The epistemologies we're looking at are similar, so of course, you say pervasive species, and you come up with they don't know exactly what that means, and you go into a whole process of looking at it, and what's fascinating is the individual communities took that framework and attached it to their cosmology. You see, Pentecostalism is increasingly popular in Australia. Churches like Hillsong offer an enthusiastic style of worship and the promise of tangible blessings from God, health and wealth in particular. While the number of Australians attending Catholic and Anglican churches is dwindling, Pentecostalism is bucking the trend. The number of followers actually grew almost 20% in the decade to 2016.
Essentially, what you really want to have happened is for the leaves to be producing lots of nutrients, sugars, and such. So that when they finally convert over to the dormant period, when they grow up, a layer of cell is in separate leaves, the rest of the tree known as the sand layer, there are plenty of sugars and nutrients trapped in that leaf, so that as the chlorophyll fades and leaf loses that green color, there are plenty of other materials in there that give the leaves their color. I wanted to delve deeper into the world of the molecules because that's where you do your work. Your speciality is protein assemblies. You look at the way DNA repairs itself, and this is all happening at the level of the cell. at the level of molecules and, of course, proteins. So you've buried yourself into what they call structural biology. Birds actually evolved after mammals. Approximately 50 to 100 million years after mammals. So mammals are actually older than birds. Mammals actually didn't even evolve from reptiles, they evolved from a stem amniote ancestor, and reptiles also evolved from a stem amniote, amphibian-like ancestor. So we have to get rid of this idea of mammals being more advanced than birds and so forth. All that has to be thrown out the window. On a tour of Spain, in 1912, a fellow traveler introduced Holst to astrology. And he became so curious that sowed the seeds of his spectacular orchestral suite. The planet C, his most popular if not most representative of creation, which portrays the astrological rather than the mythological character of 7 planets in our solar system. Jupiter, THC bringer of jollity, has both of its jovial feet planted firmly on the ground. Well, it's a contested concept, and like many content concepts, I think you can identify an agreed-upon core and then a sort-of contested penumbra. I think that perhaps the agreed-upon core might be this: it's something held at once by academia and by academic institutions, and it is something like a village of freedom in the way in which THC conduct of teaching and research is overtaken.